Story 1. My manager started snapping her fingers in my face, 3 inches from my eyes, saying in a slow drawl, "You were doing it wrong. That's not how I told you to do it." When I was folding the shirt somewhat more slowly and less optimally than I had been shown, though I achieved the same fold. It was my third week and one of 20 folds I had to learn on that job. I walked right then and there. Story 2. I worked at a call center for the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. I refused to try to sell a direct television package to a woman who was crying on the phone because she had to switch her phone plan to her name instead of her husband's after he had just died. Story 3. My manager's boss conducted a surprise inspection, and my manager wrote me up for doing my job exactly the way he had trained me. Apparently, when he trained me, he was cutting corners. Story 4. I was a receptionist for a medical software company. My boss refused my request for a single day off to take my teenage daughter to have eye surgery. I waited until the first day of her 2-week vacation and then gave my notice. It ruined her holiday. Story 5. The company told me I was to enforce 2 new policies. 1. All employees must report to work 15 minutes early for their shift, and they would not be paid for that time. 2. All employees must take their unpaid lunch break in specific areas under specific circumstances. I told them we needed a meeting to discuss the legality of the new policies before I could enforce them with my team. They replied that I must either enforce the policies or resign my position. I said I was leaving. They asked me to reconsider and not make a bad decision because I was upset, but I was already gone. Story 6. I waited tables while I was in grad school. I had requested a weekend off far in advance, right after I got my syllabus, because there was a seminar for a class. Our professor expected us to go and write a paper. It was a decent chunk of our grade. The weekend arrived, and lo and behold, I was scheduled for doubles Friday through Sunday. I hunted down the manager and said I couldn't do that. I had given months' notice. She said requests are just requests, not guarantees. I told her point blank I would fail the class if I didn't go. She shrugged and said that wasn't her problem. I said it is now and left. There was no way I would fail a class for my master's degree because I was waiting tables at a rainforest cafe. Story 7. This was 20 years ago. My fiancée had been hospitalized for 16 months after a car accident. When she passed away, my boss would not let me have time off for bereavement because we were not legally married. Story 8. I was working when I got the call that my partner of 7 years had been in a terrible car accident while visiting family in Florida. He was in the hospital, and his mother told me he was not awake yet. I was devastated and terrified. I told my coworkers and my boss because I was clearly panicking. They told me to take the rest of the weekend off to deal with things and to prepare and clean his apartment for if he returned. Specifically, they said to come back on Monday. It was a Friday. The next day, while I was cleaning his apartment, my boss called screaming about why I had not come into work that day. I told him I remembered him saying to take the weekend off and come back Monday. He told me to come to work immediately because they needed me. Against my better judgment and despite my emotional state, I went in and clocked in. My boss threw a stack of checks down on the counter that had just come in and said, "If you do that again, you are fired." He had never yelled at me or spoken sternly before. Prior to my arrival, the store had been a mess, and I had spent all of my free time reorganizing, cleaning, and setting up new systems. For some reason, him speaking to me like that and demanding my attention at that moment made me snap. A chord was struck and it resonated strongly. I understood the message. He was the kind of boss who became controlling of anyone who was valuable to him and his business. The moment you were not available when he needed or wanted you, he made you feel bad so you would be afraid to ask for more personal time or any leniency that took you away from work. I was reeling. I saw red. When he turned his back, I grabbed my check, walked out with a full line of customers at the counter, and the phone ringing with orders, and drove away. He called and texted me all day. I never went back or returned his calls. Fortunately, my partner recovered and came home safe. Unfortunately, he passed away on our anniversary a few years later. I regret every moment I passed up to spend time with him because of that job or any job. I know hardly anyone will read this now that it is buried under other comments, but it felt good to type it. I have said kind words many times and I truly mean it. Online communities can be both comforting and cruel, so it means a lot that you took a few seconds to read my story and say something. His name was Anthony. I want everyone to know what an amazing, brilliant, kind, and gentle man he was. Strong, dark, and stern, yet the light of my life. Please take the extra moment to ask your loved ones if they are okay. Story 9. Many years ago, while working in a manufacturing facility, my boss came to work already very angry because his wife had served him divorce papers. He picked up a wrench from the table and threw it at my head. I ducked and it missed. Then I closed my toolbox and wheeled it to the truck. Story 10. One very busy night while waitressing, I was standing at a table for 12 in the middle of taking their order when another waitress came up to me and said our boss wanted us in their office immediately. I left my full section in the middle of the chaos to see what the problem was. My boss chewed us both out because the other girl had asked if I would switch shifts with her and I had agreed. I didn't say anything but was obviously annoyed because I had just left all my tables thinking there was an emergency. My boss asked why I looked mad, and I told them, I feel like this could have been sorted out without me. If you didn't want her to leave early, you could have just told her no instead of pulling me away from our customers. They said, if you're going to have an attitude, get your stuff and leave. I said okay and went to transfer my tables. I was done. I had worked there 3 years, and the owners were alcoholics who treated us like garbage and spent the company's money on themselves instead of buying ingredients or paying employees. The other waitress came back out and said our boss wanted me back in the office. I went in and they told me to put my apron back on, that I wasn't fired. I said, you're both crazy if you think you can treat people the way you do and expect them to want to work for you. And I walked out. As I was leaving, they came out behind me saying I would regret it and that I would never be allowed back if I left. I raised my middle fingers and kept walking. The funny part is I let my boyfriend take my car to work that night, so I had to walk a mile home and break into my house. Story 11. I was in a meeting with my boss, who was difficult to work with. He suddenly stood up and punched the wall. He was not joking. He hit the wall of his office with his bare knuckles as if it were a punching bag. I sat in astonishment for 2 seconds, then stood up and left. I cleared out my desk and exited through the back door without speaking to anyone. There is no place for that behavior in the professional world, even if the person owns the company. Story 12. He would not train me properly, then come yell at me in front of the office. He would threaten my job or say he would hire someone else. I finally said good. I hope you find someone better, because I quit and will be leaving once the other woman returns from lunch. He tried to backpedal and ask if I was serious. I never looked back. Edit. He had hired me without any experience because he knew he could lowball me. I was paid pennies compared with someone with experience. Story 13. At one office job, I quit after the first day because the woman training me ignored me when the manager was not around, and I caught her snooping through my purse while I was in the bathroom. At another clinic job, I quit after a month because they assigned me a solo receptionist shift without training me on how to open the clinic, and then I was yelled at in front of patients for not knowing what to do. It was so bad that some patients came up to me afterward and asked if I was okay. Story 14. I was vomiting in the parking lot every day before walking into work from stress. Then one day a client literally kicked me in the teeth, and my boss would not let me leave to go to the dentist. I went anyway. I was docked pay for my time at the emergency appointment, and then they begged me not to sue. Quit. Story 15. I was exhausted. I had been working more than 50 hours a week and could not wait for the Christmas break. I was the only person out of 25 required to work Saturday mornings on a 6-week fundraiser in addition to my regular hours. Others were scheduled only once. I was scheduled all 6 Saturdays. A foreign colleague wanted to work over Christmas so she could return to her home country early in the new year. The entire office was supposed to be closed for those 2 weeks. The boss picked me to work with her and refused to let me say no. I did not want to take a break later when the rest of my family would have been off over Christmas. I could not wait another 2 weeks. I was barely hanging on. The boss would not relent, so I quit. The boss ended up working with the colleague herself. That was fine with me. The mystery was why it had to be me or her out of 25 coworkers. Not my problem. Story 16. I never have. My favorite example is a coworker in student transportation who finally got a position she wanted after years of stress in another job. Management called her over the summer and told her she was being reassigned to the stressful role because no one else wanted it. She had fought long and hard to get that position. Her immediate response was, "Then tell me what I need to do to resign." She did, and she has been at peace with her decision ever since. Story 17. At Godfather's Pizza, the manager would not give me my paycheck at 8 p.m. on Sunday because the money might not be in the account yet. He said I could pick it up at 9 a.m. on Monday. This was decades ago, before direct and mobile deposits. The bank would not be open until the next day anyway, and all of the paychecks were in his hand at that moment. There had been many issues before, but that was the final sign the manager was completely uninterested in reason. In the next few weeks, nearly everyone else quit. The manager was then fired. Story 18. Not me, but a colleague once wrote a long, terrible email, hit send at 10:30 a.m., and left the building immediately. He sent blind copies to all recipients but addressed it to multiple departments of a large multinational where I worked. No one knew who did or did not receive the email. Only the gasps and exclamations of, "Oh my God," around the office. He was deeply disgruntled and attacked several managers, supervisors, and colleagues with absolute venom. It was amazing. It is still the best work email I have ever received. Some issues he called out actually had to be addressed by management, and it brought about a lot of positive change. If you were out there, Khalil, that was impressive. Story 19. When I was 20, I worked a commission-based sales job. The manager hated me for some reason. I still have no idea why. I tried really hard, had a good attitude, and followed all the rules. My sales were not extraordinary, but I always met my numbers. My grandmother died about 6 months into the job. I texted my manager to tell him I would be taking my 3 days of bereavement as allowed by the union. I even apologized for the inconvenience, as if I could control my grandmother's death. He called me the day after she died, accusing me of lying and saying I was lazy and just wanted the time off. Keep in mind, I had never called out before or even been more than 5 minutes late for a shift. I sent him medical documentation proving she had suffered a stroke during the night and passed away. He called back and said fine, I could have that day off, but he wanted to see me the next day, my 3rd day of union-protected bereavement, or I would be fired. Stricken with grief but terrified of losing my job, I drove the 2 hours back to my apartment from my grandmother's house that night. The next morning, I went to work tired and melancholy. He told me to smile because no one wants to buy cell phones from a sad girl. I plastered on a smile and went to the sales floor. At lunchtime, I cried in my car, reapplied my makeup, and went back to work. I was helping a customer when he came over to the table and started asking the same questions to see what products the customer would be eligible for. The customer was baffled and said I had already covered everything and no further help was necessary. He launched into a rant about what a terrible, useless employee I was. I looked at the customer and said, "I am so sorry to leave you with him, but as of this moment I quit." The manager followed me to the break room, shouting while I gathered my purse, turned in my equipment, and clocked out. He continued berating me at my car. The customer I had been helping came out and physically stood between me and the manager so I could get into my car and drive away. The manager proceeded to call me every day for a week and left abusive voicemails about me missing shifts, because he said he did not accept my resignation. He even called me the day of my grandmother's funeral and said that now that she had been cremated, I had no excuse not to come back to work. Screw American Telephone and Telegraph and screw that manager Jeremy. I hope he eventually got a taste of his own medicine. Story 20. The boss told me I should be sleeping at his house because that's the level of dedication he needed from me. Bye. Story 21. I was the housekeeping supervisor at a hotel. Every holiday, all the managers took time off, leaving me as the highest-ranking manager on duty. After working a full year of holidays alone, I asked for a raise but was denied the following year on the city's biggest party day. I assigned my employees their work, then texted the managers a picture of myself at the bar, joking that the hotel might be on fire. Quit. Story 22. I was promised that if I got my accounting degree, they would move me to internal audit so I could get hours toward my certified public accountant designation. I worked very hard, graduated, and the boss said, "Yeah, we're going to move you to customer service. Sound good?" I stayed late that night drafting a company-wide screw you email. I probably shouldn't have done that in hindsight, but some bridges just begged to be burned. Story 23. The owner of the company told me to fire a woman for arriving at work on time. It was always something different with him, some ridiculous new rule he applied retroactively to suit whatever mood he was in that day. That particular morning, he took it as a personal insult and a show of blatant disrespect that his employees did not arrive early. I could not do it. I would not fire a woman I did not particularly like to satisfy another of his whims. Instead, I marched into his office and quit. Oddly enough, the woman I refused to fire continued working for him for years. She might even still be there now, 20-something years later. Story 24. I was flat out lied to about the position. It was a management position at a residential mental health facility, and I had taken it, leaving a well-paying but stressful job, because it would not require travel and was supposed to be much more laid back. On top of many other issues, I ended up having to work 8 weeks in a row without a single day off, including weekends and one holiday. After a very heated meeting with upper management in which one person was clearly lying to cover their own mistakes, I sent a resignation email from the parking lot. Story 25. I was told I did not have the experience to move up. They hired a person with 1/20th of my experience for that position. Story 26. I worked as a mortuary transporter, the person who picks up deceased people and brings them to a family-owned crematory. The boss was difficult and her husband was incompetent. There were constant on-call overnight shifts and no paid time off, but I enjoyed the work so I put up with it. The problem was that my boss refused to do direct deposit and handed out checks on Monday. I had been on call the weekend before payday and it was really busy, especially Sunday night. I was out from about 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. picking up bodies, so on Monday I called out because I did not want to drive a full shift with no sleep. In my sleep deprivation, I had forgotten I was supposed to get paid. That Friday, I mentioned to a coworker that I could not wait to get paid next week. He told me we had been paid on Monday and asked if I had never received my check. At the end of the day, I went to my boss and asked, and she laughed and said she had wondered when I would ask and had hoped I had just forgotten. Her playing cute with my checks was the beginning of the end. At the next payday, she sat us down and explained that from then on drivers were not allowed to call out just because they had worked all night. By that point, she had driven off all the other transporters and was down to me and one other full-time driver, with another transporter working 2 days a week, and the business could not function if either of us called out. I got my check from her, and at the end of the day, after working until 10 p.m., I left a note saying I quit effective immediately and asked her to mail my last check. A few months later, the other driver texted me and said she had never replaced me. He had quit, been hired at another funeral home, and convinced the part-time driver to go with him. I checked the website and apparently they are still open. I don't know how they managed without anyone to pick up the deceased. Story 27. When I was driving home, my blood pressure shot through the roof because someone was driving the same make, model, and color car as the boss. Obviously, that was not the straw, just the recognition that there would be no more straws. Story 28. I am genuinely upset right now. My manager told me our dishwasher is broken and will not be fixed until at least Thursday. And I have to work solo shifts next week because we are seriously understaffed after 2 people were let go in January. I have repeatedly told management that we need more staff to cover vacation days and sick leave. Update. Restarting fixed the dishwasher, so that is at least one problem off my back. Story 29. My boss cursed at me because I took a phone message for him while he was already on a call. Apparently, he was eagerly awaiting the call I answered and would have preferred that I interrupt him. I threw a pencil at the wall and said, "Do I look like a mind reader? Cut me my check. Quit." He tried to backpedal, but there had been many prior incidents. Story 30. I worked at a Korean barbecue restaurant. Because I was inexperienced, they cut my wages. They hired me as a server and made me clean toilets and grills all day. I worked a 12-hour shift and was given $9.45 in cash. I quit on the spot. Story 31. My dad was in the intensive care unit, and I was put on a performance plan because I missed 3 days in a row. The best thing I ever did was quit that job without another position lined up. I got a job a few months later, and I am extremely happy there. Story 32. I worked as the kitchen bitch at a 24-hour Greek restaurant. I was hired as a dishwasher and also did cold prep and maintenance. I peeled 50-pound bags of onions, carrots, and potatoes, and I made dry ribs, pizza, and salads. I had booked 3 days off over a weekend. On the second day, I was called at 7 a.m. and told I was late. When I arrived, I was told I was on for an 11 a.m. start, which was later changed to 4 p.m. When I went in, it was then changed to 11 p.m. When I arrived for 4 p.m. and when I arrived for 11 p.m. it was changed again to show I actually had the 3 days off. For schedule changes in 24 hours. Laws here require 1 week minimum notice. The owner routinely changed the schedule after employees clocked out to show they worked shorter hours, and you had to check at 7 a.m. to see if you were on for the day. I told them exactly what I thought and said I would be back in 2 weeks for my paycheck. Story 33. I had a steady schedule working security in a Class A office building. 3 swing shifts from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. and 2 grave shifts from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. per week. My weekend was Friday and Saturday. The grave shifts were actually really chill and easy to deal with. I liked them, but only 2 per week. Then a new security company took over. All the supervisors were fired and replaced by supervisors from the new company. Suddenly, I was scheduled for 5 grave shifts. I asked to switch to swing shifts, but they refused. They offered to move me to a different site, and it was still 5 grave shifts. I found out my former supervisor was now the security manager at a local mall. I called him. He offered me a job, and I accepted. I retrieved my uniform from the old company, drove to the office, walked in, dropped the uniform on the director's desk, turned and left. Then I went to the mall and picked up my new uniform. Story 34. I was 16 and working at a gas station. The owner went on a hunting trip. His wife came in, opened the safe, took money, and left. I was accused of stealing it. I pointed out that I did not have the combination, and the receipts for the day I worked that weekend did not add up to the amount missing. He called the police and admitted to them that only he and his wife had the combination. He was a fucking moron. Story 35. I was told I was not working hard enough after months of more than 70-hour weeks as a salaried employee covering multiple jobs. I had asked several times to hire someone else. I knew we had the budget. I agreed to try harder and called my mother to vent because I was so angry. During the call, she texted my then boyfriend, now husband, to come to me because she genuinely thought I might harm myself. I admitted I was hysterical, so I understood why she was worried. When he told me that, I called my boss back and quit without notice. Even worse, a few days later, I was asked to call my former boss to calm her down and tell her it was not her fault. I did not do that, but I calmly explained how she had burned me out and that more staff were needed to cover the workload I had been handling. Otherwise, the same thing would happen again. Story 36. I was working in fast food and had been promised training for promotions several times that never happened, although others hired with me received it. I still did my job well. Then the company brought in a person with no experience in food service, hospitality, or retail and instantly made her a manager in training. I had to teach her how to do things in the restaurant, even though she was being paid almost double what I was. One day she was allowed to manage the restaurant during lunch. Our restaurant was across from a high school and we got 3 quick bursts of customers at predictable times. 10:45 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 2:05 p.m., because that is when school let out. I was only working a short shift that day and was due a 10-minute break before 2:30 p.m. I asked her to let me take it around 1 p.m. because I could not go home after that shift and needed to eat. She refused because it was the middle of lunch. although there was no line and I had cleared the order screens. I was the only person due a break, so it seemed perfect, but I was told to wait. At 2:08 p.m., I was sent on break with a line to the door. It took an extra 3 minutes to get back because of how long I had waited to get food. When I returned, I washed my hands and began clearing the backlog of orders that had piled up during our most predictable rush. She wanted to talk about how long my break had been. I asked if we could wait until after the rush because I needed to concentrate when spinning shakes or the blender could hurt someone. She insisted we talk immediately. I snapped and said, "What the hell? It's your fault you sent me on break and now we are backed up. And you think my extra 3 minutes chewing my lunch is the reason?" I turned and walked to the store's general manager, who was supervising, and asked if we could speak for 5 seconds. The manager said the trainer was in charge, so no. I said that was fine and that I was quitting. I was close enough to the time clock that I did not have to take a step to punch in my number. I said I would bring my uniform back next week after I washed it, and walked out in the middle of the rush. I did not regret it. I returned later to eat there. None of my co-workers or the managers held a grudge. A few weeks later, I learned she had a meltdown and quit because she could not handle the pressure and pace of being an assistant manager at a chain fast food restaurant. Story 37. My boss told me that he does not care if I do not have time to spend with my son. I quit on the spot. Story 38. I was working in home care for $10 an hour and had clients all over the city. One day my car would not start. It was minus 40 degrees Celsius or so, and I called to say I could not get to work. I was told to take the bus. I did not have a winter jacket. I lived in a single wide trailer, barely making ends meet, and I layered sweatshirts to stay warm in my car and when walking from my car to a client's house, but it was not nearly warm enough to take the bus. I swallowed my pride and told the scheduler I did not have a winter coat and could not do that. She responded in a snarky, dismissive tone that she thought I just wanted the day off. It made me cry. I could not afford to miss work. I said okay, hung up, and wrote my resignation. I had expected compassion from someone who worked in nursing and instead was mortified. I later found a much better job with higher pay and a lot more kindness. Story 39. This just happened last week. I was driving a shuttle bus for a retirement community when the maintenance department manager accused me of drinking on the job. It was an out-of-pocket accusation without a shred of proof other than his claim of smelling alcohol on me. There are hand sanitizer stations next to every time clock, and I use them. I said, "I'll take a breathalyzer test right now. Let's go." He balked and pretended he had not just accused me of putting the residents' lives at risk, then expected me to finish my shift. I left and called in sick for the next week, and they fired me for no call, no show for an entire week. Check your voicemails, prick. Screw that place. Story 40. I wanted to take long service leave, but I was denied because we are too busy right now. I replied to that email with my resignation, handed my pass to security, and walked out the door. Story 41. I started training a machinist who told me his starting wage was $27 per hour. He had a few years of experience but had been out of the industry for a while. After training, he kept coming to me to have me fix his problems and asked really dumb questions. I asked my boss for a raise because this machinist earned $27 per hour. I earned $22 per hour. He said he could find someone to do my job for $16 per hour, so I said, "Okay, then let's do that." I handed him my badge and walked out after 15 years. Story 42. He gave me 72 business hours of work and insisted it be completed in 36 calendar hours. When I pointed out the inconsistency, he said, "Do what you can." When I submitted it, he called me from vacation to scream at me about mistakes. I deleted everything, walked away, and blocked him on all platforms. Story 43. Worked at an upscale, busy bar a couple of years back, right after the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. We were constantly understaffed, overworked, and treated like shit by management and customers. One Friday night, my manager let the other bartender go early because he had a crush on her and wanted to sleep with her. I got overwhelmed by a rush and he started complaining at me about not being able to handle the bar. I looked him in the eye, about to really rage, and without a word walked to the back into the liquor room, grabbed 2 bottles of Jameson, put them in my backpack, and walked out the front door. My manager's fearful, confused face as he asked where I was going and what I was doing was priceless. It was the best decision I made. I am not joking, laughing my ass off. Story 44. I had to drive to a site. The directions were wrong, so I ended up walking a mile in North Texas in July while carrying 35 pounds of materials. Edited to add. This was before cell phones. Story 45. 1. The boss quit, and they wanted me to run the department as the manager but keep me at assistant level pay. 2. They hired a new manager behind my back for the job they had been promising me for months, and wanted me to train her, still at assistant level pay. 3. The new manager went on vacation, and I was expected to run the department alone. I waited until the new manager was out of town, and then I quit. Story 46. I am a tax attorney. My partner said my weight made me look unprofessional. Story 47. I had one of those bosses who, as soon as he entered the room, made the energy in the building drop. I would hear him screaming at people daily in his office. One day he yelled at me for not checking with him before writing a press release. The next day I checked with him, and he yelled at me for not thinking for myself. I realized he was just a power-tripping jerk and handed in my resignation to human resources within an hour. Story 48. My manager gave me instructions, admonished me for following them, and then denied ever giving them. This happened multiple times. Story 49. I once rage quit as a server, walked home, then returned 20 minutes later. No one realized I had quit, so I gave 2 weeks' notice and finished working. My partner, however, rage quit as a manager, closed the restaurant and sent everyone home. The owner did not know the restaurant was closed until 2 days later. Most employees rarely showed up anyway, so if any arrived and found it closed, they simply went home. Story 50. I realized I was running the boss's business and he balked at my timesheet. Story 51. Mine? I was tired of doing a 3-person job. My boss following me around, calling me at home while I was sick, and talking to me outside the bathroom door were driving me crazy. I came back from vacation one day to find piles of work that other people could have done. Quit, packed my things, and left. Story 52. I am a physician who performs procedures. The business consisted of several outpatient offices. Specifically, we performed a high volume of peripheral arterial interventions and dialysis access maintenance. We also performed vascular ultrasounds. In the first month, I watched a colleague sign off on numerous ultrasounds that he had not interpreted. They were only preliminary readings from the sonographer. All of these were billed as physician interpretations, which is fraud. I realized many procedures were not indicated. Patient data such as test results, symptoms, and laboratory values were fabricated or altered to trigger approval of cases. I noticed many normal angiograms which did not make sense. The team pushed us to always perform an intervention, usually atherectomy, because it yielded the highest reimbursement, around $20,000. There was inadequate equipment and only one nurse for every procedure. She was also the office manager and handled billing and reception. The ultrasound unit was damaged and images were subdiagnostic at best. The electronic medical record system was from the early 2000s. Ultrasound and angiogram images were often deleted, tampered with, or swapped between patients so an audit would not reveal the fraud. The angiographic equipment, including the X-ray unit and table, had not been inspected or certified for years. I voiced my concerns. Nothing was done. The company existed solely to generate profit, with no regard for patients. I witnessed complications from procedures that did not need to be performed. After enough of this, I went to work one day and suddenly quit at about 2 in the afternoon. The company was already under a corporate integrity agreement. Appropriate regulatory agencies were notified. They are still in business today, but that will not last. Story 53. Mo was the new boss at the college sandwich shop where I worked. He did not know the job or the brand and needed the staff to train him, but he was mean and many employees quit. I was the only one who knew how to make all the sandwiches. It was a busy Saturday and the line was out the door. I was trying to show him how to make sandwiches while he took orders and kept yelling at me. I said, "Mo, I am doing the best I can. If you raise your voice at me one more time, I will leave." He yelled at me again, so I walked out. He chased me into the parking lot and ran after my car with a fist in the air, but I told him I would not be spoken to like that. I do not think Mo was used to teenage girls standing up to him, and he did not expect me to leave him on his own. Story 54. Office Max. I worked in a fairly rural location. It seemed like the job would not be too difficult if there were not many customers. Instead of having a full staff of one stalker/puller, one cashier, one floor salesperson, and one Impress Print Studio employee, they made one person do all of that. That person was usually me. I became very angry because the schedule usually had just me and another manager named Casey, who did nothing besides lounge in the back office and play video games. When corporate came for a random walkthrough and found that barely anything was stocked, that there was a line at the print studio and at the ink station, and a line at the front checkout, I told them, "Go see for yourself. He is probably playing Halo back there." They did. He started yelling and blamed me for not having anything done. Corporate pulled me aside and asked if the store would benefit from additional employees. Yes. Then maybe we could actually get things done. They told me they would send an employee from another store while they hired and trained adequate staff. The first day that employee showed up, Casey sent her home, saying I had no problem handling it, when really he did not want anyone reporting that he lounged all day. This was 7:45 a.m. on a Saturday. The store was about to open for a big sale. Nothing was stocked. People were waiting at the door to look at items that had not been put out on the floor or pulled from packing. I told Casey I was going to step outside to smoke, and he said to hurry up because corporate was coming at noon and the store had better be stocked and ready or it would be my responsibility. I walked back toward Casey's direction, took off my lanyard and badge, slid them across the counter and said, "You can handle it. Quit. I would get to stocking if I were you." Then I walked out of the store. I called my grandfather and we met for breakfast while Casey received about 40 missed calls and voicemails, which he deleted without listening. Story 55. I tried putting in my 2 weeks notice, but every leader was either gone on a business trip, on vacation, or not my direct manager. I gave my 2 weeks notice to a non-direct manager, my manager's sister. I also sent him an email. That was exactly 2 weeks. My direct manager came in 2 days later and saw my email. He got angry because I was unethical, and I didn't give a proper 2-week notice when I told him my last day was 12 days away, because 2 days earlier I had tried reaching him and had told his sister. He got upset and basically said whatever to me. At the end of that week, I still had a week left. We got our paychecks. Because 2 weeks before that there had been a federal holiday. The shop was shut down and nobody could work. Guess who didn't get paid for their holiday? Who has 2 thumbs and also had 50% of their paycheck that pay cycle? That was me. I went to his office and said there must be a mistake, and he said there wasn't. I asked him to elaborate and his words were, "It wasn't fair you didn't give us the proper heads up, so I thought it would only be fair to do the same to you." I nodded and smiled and said, "All right, bud." I went back to my office and sabotaged their ramshackle in-house database because I was angry. I deleted entries and so on. I called the Occupational Safety and Health Administration on multiple violations and walked out the back door, but only after I dumped my container of egg salad inside his lunchbox and put his lunchbox in the non-air-conditioned shop during temperatures over 98 degrees Fahrenheit. I hope you're reading this, Burns. I edited for clarity because I was angry writing this. Story 56. All of us graduate student assistants were forced to come to campus to work in person, sharing cramped cubicle spaces while attending Zoom meetings where 100% of the full-time staff were working from home. To add insult to injury, we had spent an entire summer working remotely and had proven our ability to complete high-quality work. Nobody was even on campus to supervise us or offer assistance without joining a call anyway. It was bullshit and I quit halfway through the year. Story 57. My boss used to rate my pants. One day I received a 10 out of 10 and he said, "Damn." I walked out. I should have quit the first time, but I needed the benefits. Story 58. I was sweating profusely in the back room of a convenience store washing dishes when a coworker came in, saw me soaked, then went back out and told people I was washing my hair in the sink with the dishes. I decided to quit and never went back. I went to work at McDonald's after that. Story 59. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the small company I worked for started posting their month-to-month record profits on the bulletin board. The company increased its monthly revenue from $4 million to $15 million. They then had the nerve to tell all of us that there was not enough in the bank to give any of us a raise for almost 2 years. I used 1 week of vacation to attend the orientation for a new job. At the end of that week, I left orientation, drove to my old job, walked in, and told the Human Resources Department that I quit. The best part was that the Human Resources Department was highly incompetent and I ended up receiving my week of vacation pay twice. Story 60. They were not going to give me a summer position after my contract ended, so I would be out of work in less than 2 weeks. Then I got a call. An application and interview I had done months earlier had gone well, and training would start in 2 days. I will not say where I worked, but the job was physically and mentally draining. I often felt sick to my stomach as I headed in, dreading the challenges that awaited me. I received a bad performance review and was told I would be out of a job in a few weeks. While standing outside the building wondering what to do, I got a call offering me a position at a different company. I did not even let the caller finish telling me the hours or pay. I said I was available to start immediately and that training in 2 days was perfectly fine. I turned on my heel, went back inside, removed my work shirt, returned it to the person who had given me the review, and told her I quit. The supervisor asked who would cover my shifts. I replied that it was not my problem since they had been going to let me go anyway. I was angry when I quit, but I calmed down and felt elated on the drive home. Story 61. My hours were cut from 40 per week to 8 per week, despite being classified and signed on as full-time. Although I was in a union, I was told nothing could be done. I walked out and never looked back. Story 62. I was a community engagement officer. I took a disabled adult into the community to achieve goals such as grocery shopping, learning basic money concepts, and rudimentary budgeting. He was fine. His mother was difficult. She had spent decades abusing underpaid staff at underfunded social services, to the point that her sense of what the world owed her for free was severely distorted. All she ever did for herself was sit in front of Netflix all day. She would call almost always after I had finished for the day and was driving him home, to demand that I stop at a convenience store for cigarettes or alcohol, or go to a specific fast food restaurant on the other side of town because I was apparently her free personal courier. My favorite moment was when she actually had me pick up cigarettes and drop them off at her cousin's house, as if the whole family should be involved in taking advantage of underpaid public servants. I tried to set simple boundaries, for example, that she could ask me when I was leaving for specific errands. She was terrible about it. She would say things like, "I do not know when I will need cigarettes. I will call when I do." She would also say, "I cannot afford Instacart or Uber, even though my child and I easily spend $1,000 a month on fast food. My car payments are $500 per month, and we have not even started talking about alcohol and cigarettes. No, paying people for their labor is where I need to cut corners." So I cut her off. She continued to pretend she did not understand that she was cut off like a 5-year-old. One day she demanded that I go to a convenience store and get her cigarettes. I said no. She sat nearby, yards away from a car that cost $500 per month, and proceeded to text her child to harass me for what she thought she was owed. It occurred to me that no $10 per hour job was worth it. I dropped him off at her place and told her I was glad she would be twitching and sweating all night. I am still owed money from that job, which I will likely never see. Story 63. I worked in retail. I sprained my ankle badly while ice skating and could not get out of bed. I had to call in sick and take 2 days off before I was even able to limp to work. When I returned, my manager pulled me into his office and screamed at me for taking 2 days off for a physical injury that kept me from doing my job. I threw a cold cup of coffee on him and walked out. My only regret is that the coffee was cold. Story 64. I was ejaculated on by a customer while kneeling to stock a shelf at Target. Story 65. I was falsely accused of till theft by the actual thief. While the owner was on holiday, He suspended me without pay until he returned to deal with it. I live in the United Kingdom. Suspension without pay is illegal. During my suspension, he hired someone else to fill my position so he could not legitimately fire me or make me redundant. I sued him. He was also racist towards several employees, but because those employees were white and he was not, it was apparently not considered a big deal. He was later sued by 2 other employees he had hired. Story 66. I was 20 at the time, the oldest member of staff and a cook. The night before, one of our waitresses, who usually cleaned up the last bits, pulled the dishwasher's plug and left it on the floor beside the machine but forgot to turn the dishwasher off. The next morning the owner came in and had a full meltdown at her. He reduced her to tears, and I couldn't take it. I sent her to get the bread and used the time to explain to him that his outbursts affected everyone and asked him to be more reasonable. In retrospect, it was possibly the wrong choice of words. He replied that, if that was how I felt, there was the door. I took the invitation. Story 67. I was told to move a bunch of floor joists to the back of a building that was being framed. It was my first day on the job, so I agreed to move these 20-foot, 100-pound boards across muddy, uneven terrain. I took my tool belt off because I was just carrying lumber. The boss yelled at me, "You're no fucking Mexican. Put that tool belt back on." I gave him the finger, grabbed my pack, and left. I drove down a few streets, got hired for more money, and the whole crew got high. Fuck you, motherfucker. Story 68. The foreman tried to throw me under the bus for a $4 million mistake in a product run that was his fault. This, along with many other problems, led to a confrontation. The store owner stood there calling me every name under the sun and threatening me with lawsuits and other nonsense. I told him to shut up before I climbed over the desk and confronted him. That stunned him and everyone in the office. I was normally a quiet guy. I then simply said I quit and walked out. That day, I called the Indiana Occupational Safety and Health Administration and said I wanted to report some major issues. I knew one of the higher-ups there, and the next day I went to the factory with representatives from the Indiana Occupational Safety and Health Administration. The owner went white and tried to say I was not allowed on the property, but that did not fly with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. In total, the visit resulted in $15 million in violations and 2 weeks of closure just to fix half the problems so they could reopen. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.